Rejected for her color, she was supposed to disappear, but instead, she uncovered a buried truth that would shake an entire town. Clara Johnson stepped off the train onto the bustling platform of Greenwood Valley, her neatly polished shoes clicking against the weathered wooden planks. The crisp air carried the scent of freshly cut hay and distant wildflowers, but Clara's heart was too heavy to notice. 6 months of heartfelt letters, each filled with promises of love and companionship, had led her here. 6 months of dreaming about a new life, far from the relentless prejudice she had faced in the city. But all those dreams crumbled the moment she locked eyes with William Carter. The man's face went pale, his hopeful smile fading as if he had just seen a ghost. His hand, which clutched a bouquet of wildflowers, trembled slightly. You're Clara Johnson?" he stuttered, his voice weak, barely audible over the bustling sounds of the station. "Yes, Mr. Carter," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest. "I'm Clara Johnson, the woman you've been writing to." For a brief second, there was only silence. The world seemed to slow down, and Clara became acutely aware of the curious glances of passing travelers, the murmurs of onlookers who sensed the tension. Then William's mouth twisted into an awkward, forced smile. This isn't going to work," he blurted out, taking a step back. You didn't mention that you were... His voice trailed off, his gaze shifting uncomfortably from Clara to the ground. "That I'm black," Clara finished for him, her tone calm, almost resigned. It wasn't the first time she had encountered this look of shock, this abrupt rejection. But something about this moment hurt more. Perhaps it was the weight of all her hopes being crushed at once. "I mean, in your letters, you sounded so well-spoken. I just assumed." William's voice wavered, the bouquet in his hand wilting as his fingers crushed the delicate stems. "I assumed you were a decent man," Clara replied, her voice now tinged with a quiet strength. "Clearly we were both mistaken." William's face flushed red, embarrassment mixing with defensiveness. "You have to understand, Miss Johnson, it's not me. It's the community here. My business, my reputation. I can't be seen with someone like you." "Someone like me?" Clara's voice was sharper now, her brown eyes narrowing. "You mean someone who trusted you enough to travel across the country, believing in your promises? Someone who thought you were a man of integrity?" I'll pay for your ticket back," William stammered, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a handful of crumpled bills. You can find another place. I'm sure you'll manage." Clara looked at the money, then back at William. Her pride screamed at her to turn and walk away, but a cold, sinking dread gripped her heart. She had spent nearly all her savings to get here. She had no family waiting, no home to return to. For a brief moment, a feeling of helplessness washed over her, but she quickly pushed it aside. Before she could respond, a deep, confident voice cut through the tension. "Is that your solution, Carter? Throw money at the problem and hope it disappears?" Both Clara and William turned. Standing just a few feet away was a tall man, his sun-kissed face framed by dark, slightly graying hair. His clothes were simple but well-tailored, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of true wealth. His piercing blue eyes were fixed on William, and there was a calm authority in his gaze. "Edward, Mr. Hale," William stammered, the confidence in his voice evaporating. This is none of your business." Edward Hale's lips curled into a thin smile. "It became my business when I saw a man I've known for years reveal himself as a coward." His gaze softened slightly as he turned to Clara. "Miss, forgive the scene. My name is Edward Hale. I have a property just outside town. If you have nowhere else to go, I would be honored to offer you a place to stay while you decide your next step." Clara's eyes widened, suspicion flaring in her chest. Was this just another cruel trick, another false promise? But as she looked into Edward's eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in William's sincerity. "Mr. Hale, I don't know what to say, Clara whispered, struggling to keep her composure. Say yes, Edward replied, his voice calm but firm. No one deserves to be stranded in a place that doesn't welcome them. William's face turned even paler. Hale, you can't be serious. What will people think? What will they say about you? The same people who do business with me every day? The same people who rely on my land to make a living? Edward's voice was cold, a challenge in his tone. I'm quite curious to hear what they'll say. A tense silence followed. William stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, before finally shoving the crumpled bills back into his pocket and storming off without another word. Clara watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. Relief, shame, and a strange growing sense of anger twisted inside her. But when she turned to Edward, his calm, steady presence seemed to quiet the storm within her. Thank you, she said softly. Edward smiled. Come, I'll have Mrs. Thompson prepare a room for you. Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. As Edward led her towards the waiting carriage, she took one last glance at the platform where her dreams had been shattered, and then, just as suddenly, saved. But as the carriage began to move, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that her story in Greenwood Valley was only just beginning. And for the first time in a long while, hope began to stir in her heart once more. The carriage rumbled along the winding dirt road, sunlight filtering through the tall, swaying trees that lined the path. Clara Johnson sat silently, her gaze fixed on the passing fields, her thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and cautious hope. Just hours ago she had been humiliated, cast aside at the station. Now she was on her way to the estate of a man who had treated her with unexpected kindness. Beside her, Edward Hale sat with a calm, composed demeanor, his sharp blue eyes occasionally glancing at Clara as if ensuring she was truly there. I apologize for the rough road, he said, a gentle warmth in his voice. It's a bit of a distance, but I promise the view is worth it. Clara managed a faint smile. Thank you, Mr. Hale. I'm not sure how to properly express my gratitude. There's no need for gratitude, Miss Johnson, Edward replied. A decent person should do what is right, without expecting anything in return. He paused, then added, and please, call me Edward. Then you must call me Clara, she said, feeling a slight tension ease from her shoulders. The trees gave way to vast, open fields, dotted with grazing horses and lush green pastures. In the distance, a grand Victorian mansion emerged, its tall spires and wide verandas casting an impressive silhouette against the sky. As they drew closer, Clara's eyes widened. This was not merely a farm, it was an estate, a world of its own. Welcome to Greenwood Manor, Edward announced with a touch of pride. It's been in my family for generations, though I've done a bit of work to keep it thriving. Clara stepped down from the carriage, her gaze sweeping over the vast gardens, the rose bushes perfectly trimmed, the gravel paths lined with blooming lavender. The mansion itself loomed like a quiet guardian, its large windows reflecting the afternoon light. The front door opened, and a middle-aged woman with a kind but firm expression appeared. Her greying hair was neatly pinned back, and her crisp apron spoke of discipline and care. Good afternoon, Mr. Hale, she greeted, her voice clear and measured. I see we have a guest. Yes, Mrs. Thompson, Edward replied. This is Miss Clara Johnson. She will be staying with us for a while. Mrs. Thompson's keen eyes softened slightly as she turned to Clara. Welcome, Miss Johnson. I've prepared the blue room, the one with the best view of the garden. Please follow me. Clara followed Mrs. Thompson through the grand foyer, her footsteps echoing against the polished marble floors. The walls were adorned with oil paintings, each one capturing landscapes and portraits of stern-looking ancestors. A grand staircase curved elegantly towards the upper floors, its banister a masterpiece of carved oak. Mrs. Thompson led Clara down a long corridor, past doors that remained quietly closed until they reached the blue room. When the door swung open, Clara's breath caught. A large bed, covered in a soft, quilted blanket, stood against one wall, and tall windows overlooked the vibrant gardens below. Light poured in, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. "Please let me know if you need anything, Miss Johnson," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice gentler now. "Dinner will be served at 7. Clara nodded, trying to find her voice. "Thank you. Truly." Left alone, Clara allowed herself a moment to sit by the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them against her lap. What had just happened? Was this all real? She had arrived in Greenwood Valley with nothing but a broken dream and a small suitcase. Now she was in a mansion, a guest of a man she barely knew. But kindness like this didn't come without a price, she knew that too well. Had she simply traded one false promise for another? Was Edward's generosity genuine, or was there something he expected from her? The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside for now. As evening approached, Clara changed into a modest but elegant dress, one of the few she had managed to pack. She carefully brushed her hair and steadied her breath before stepping out of her room. The hallway was quieter now, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. She descended the grand staircase and found her way to the dining room. The table was set with fine china, silverware gleaming under the warm glow of the chandelier. Edward stood by the large windows, looking out over the fields, but turned with a welcoming smile as she entered. "I hope the room is to your liking," he asked. It's more than I could have ever imagined," Clara replied, genuinely touched. "Please have a seat," Edward gestured, and they both settled at the table. Mrs. Thompson appeared briefly, serving a beautifully prepared roast with fresh vegetables, warm bread, and a fragrant soup. As they ate, Edward shared stories of Greenwood Valley, how his family had settled here, his work with the local farmers, and his efforts to maintain fair wages for those who worked his land. Clara listened carefully, a part of her both fascinated and skeptical. Wealth often came with its own brand of cruelty, but Edward seemed different. "And what about you, Clara?" Edward asked, leaning back slightly. "Your letters must have impressed William Carter enough to invite you here." Clara's smile faltered. I was a teacher in Boston. I taught literature and history at a school for young girls of color. But when the school closed due to lack of funding, I thought I could start over here." Edward's expression softened. "Teaching is a noble profession." "Those girls were fortunate to have you." "Thank you," Clara whispered, a warmth spreading through her. It had been so long since anyone had truly seen her worth beyond the color of her skin. After dinner, Edward walked Clara back to her room. The hallway was quiet, the only sound the soft crackle of the fireplace below. As they reached her door, Edward paused. "You're safe here, Clara," he said simply. "And you're not alone." Clara's heart tightened at those words. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear them. "Good night, Edward." "Good night, Clara." As the door closed, Clara leaned against it, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. But beneath the fatigue was something else, a fragile, flickering spark of hope. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. But as she gazed out of the window at the moonlit fields, another thought lingered in her mind. This place was beautiful, tranquil, almost too perfect. And yet Clara knew that beneath the surface, secrets always lurked, especially in places where appearances meant everything. She didn't come here to find another trap. If there were secrets, she would uncover them. If there was kindness, she would treasure it. But one thing was certain. Clara Johnson was no longer the naive woman who had stepped off that train. She would not be caught off guard again. Days turned into weeks, and Clara Johnson began to settle into a quiet routine at Greenwood Manor. The grand estate, with its lush gardens, elegant corridors, and towering library, became both a sanctuary and a puzzle waiting to be solved. Edward Hale remained kind and respectful, often engaging Clara in conversations during dinner. His calm demeanor, a comforting presence in a world that had often judged her for the color of her skin. But Clara was not a woman who simply let life happen around her. Beneath her polite smiles and graceful manners was a mind constantly observing, questioning, and wondering. And it didn't take long for her to realize that Greenwood Manor was more than just a grand estate. It was a treasure trove of history and perhaps secrets. Her days were filled with quiet moments in the mansion's library, a vast room with towering bookshelves reaching the ceiling, lined with dusty tomes and ancient manuscripts. Clara had always loved books, but this library was something else entirely. It was not just a collection of stories and knowledge, it was a record of Greenwood Valley itself. "Would you be interested in organizing the library, Clara?" Edward had asked one evening, a warm smile playing on his lips. "It seems it hasn't been properly tended to in years." Clara's eyes had lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I would be honored, Mr. Hale." "Edward, please," he had reminded her with a gentle chuckle. And so Clara became the unofficial librarian of Greenwood Manor. Each morning, after a light breakfast, she would step into the grand library, the faint scent of aged paper and polished wood welcoming her. With a delicate touch, she began to sort through the shelves, organizing books by subject, carefully dusting off forgotten volumes, and occasionally pausing to lose herself in their pages. But it wasn't long before Clara discovered that this library was more than just a place of learning. Hidden among the classic works of literature, philosophy, and history were old maps, land deeds, and family records, documents that spoke of the founding of Greenwood Valley, the rise of its wealthy families, and the quiet but relentless struggle of those who had built the town with their sweat and tears. One rainy afternoon, as the soft patter of rain tapped against the tall windows, Clara's fingers brushed against a leather-bound ledger tucked behind a row of poetry books. Curious, she pulled it free, its cover worn and edges frayed. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, sloping handwriting, a journal. The name at the top read, Samuel Harris. Clara's breath caught. The name was familiar, whispered in old family stories, but she had never known the full truth. Her great-grandfather, a man who had once owned land in Greenwood Valley, but had lost everything. She had always assumed it was a tragic tale of hardship, but now, with this journal in her hands, Clara realized there was so much more to the story. She began to read, her eyes scanning the pages with a growing sense of urgency. March 15th, 1870. They came in the night, not with fire and chains, but with smiles and false promises. They told me I must leave for my own safety, that the land I had worked so hard to cultivate would be cared for in my absence. But I knew their words were lies, their kindness a mask for greed. Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the pages. April 3rd, 1870. They have taken it. My land, my home, gone. They say it now belongs to the Greenwood Property Committee, a name that means nothing but hides the truth. The wealthy families have claimed it, and I am a stranger in the place I once called my own. The words were raw, filled with pain and betrayal. But they were also a revelation. Clara's great-grandfather had been cheated, his land stolen under the guise of protection. And those who had stolen it were not nameless villains. They were the ancestors of the very people who still held power in Greenwood Valley. Clara's heart raced. What should she do with this knowledge? Who could she trust? Edward Hale had been nothing but kind to her, but his wealth and influence meant that his family, too, was part of this town's history. Could he be trusted with the truth? As she pondered this, a soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Thompson, her gentle face peeking through the doorway. "Miss Clara, would you like some tea? The rain makes for a perfect afternoon with a warm cup." Clara quickly closed the journal, slipping it behind a stack of books. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That would be lovely." The housekeeper's gaze lingered on Clara for a moment, her keen eyes seeming to notice the slight tension in Clara's shoulders. "The library has many stories, Miss Clara. Some of them are better left unread." Clara forced a polite smile. "I suppose that depends on who is doing the reading." After Mrs. Thompson left, Clara's mind raced. She couldn't simply leave this discovery buried. If her great-grandfather had been wronged, if his land had been stolen, then there was a chance she could do something about it. But she needed more than just the journal, she needed proof. Clara began to search the library with a new sense of purpose. Maps, land grants, legal documents, she examined them all, her fingers tracing the faded ink, her eyes catching the faint signatures of men who had claimed what did not belong to them. And then she found it a detailed map of Greenwood Valley, dated 1866. The names of the original landowners were listed, and there, among them, was the name Samuel Harris. His land stretched far beyond what she had imagined, encompassing fields, orchards, and even the very ground on which some of the wealthiest families had built their grand homes. Clara leaned back, a slow smile spreading across her face. For so long, she had felt powerless, a stranger in a world that judged her by the color of her skin. But now she held something more valuable than money, the truth. But she also knew the truth could be a weapon, one that could destroy lives and reputations. If she revealed this secret, if she challenged the powerful families of Greenwood Valley, she would be placing herself in their crosshairs. And yet, a quiet, fierce determination burned in her chest. Samuel Harris had lost everything, but Clara would not let his memory be buried beneath the lies of those who had wronged him. She would uncover the full truth, and when the time was right, she would decide how best to use it. For now, she would continue her quiet search, piecing together the history of Greenwood Valley, one dusty document at a time. And while the rain continued to fall outside, Clara Johnson prepared herself for the battle she knew was coming. Clara Johnson stood by the grand windows of Greenwood Manor's library, her gaze fixed on the rolling fields that stretched beyond the estate. A soft breeze rustled the curtains, and the faint scent of fresh flowers drifted in. But Clara's mind was far from the tranquil beauty outside. In her hands, she held the truth-faded documents, land deeds, and a journal that told a story of betrayal and greed. The story of her great-grandfather, Samuel Harris, and the land stolen from him by the founding families of Greenwood Valley. But secrets like these were never meant to stay hidden forever. A sudden commotion at the front of the estate broke Clara's thoughts. She turned to see Mrs. Thompson, the housekeeper, moving quickly across the courtyard, her expression tense. Moments later, Edward Hale appeared at the main door, his tall figure framed by the sunlight. "Mr. Carter is here to see you, Mr. Hale," Mrs. Thompson announced, her voice calm but firm. "William Carter." The man who had humiliated Clara at the train station, the man whose family name was etched in the stolen history of this town. Clara's chest tightened. Why was he here? Edward glanced up, his eyes meeting Clara's through the open library window. He gave her a slight nod, as if silently asking if she wished to be present. Clara hesitated only for a moment before stepping out of the library and making her way downstairs. She had nothing to fear, not anymore. William Carter stood awkwardly in the grand foyer, hat in hand, his face flushed and tense. His gaze shifted nervously from the ornate chandelier to the polished marble floors. When he saw Clara descending the staircase, his expression shifted from unease to barely concealed resentment. "Miss Johnson," he muttered, his tone cold. "Mr. Carter," Clara replied, her voice steady, though her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. Edward stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "William, what brings you here today?" William cleared his throat, struggling to maintain his composure. I came to see if Miss Johnson is comfortable. The community, well, there are concerns." "Concerns?" Clara asked, raising an eyebrow. What concerns could the community possibly have about me? You must understand, Miss Johnson, William stammered, his voice growing defensive. An unmarried woman staying in the home of an unmarried man. It raises questions. The church committee has been discussing the matter. Some have suggested, well, that it's improper. Edward's expression hardened, a hint of anger flaring in his eyes. Improper? Or simply inconvenient for those who fear change? It's about reputation, Mr. Hale, William insisted. Greenwood Valley is a respectable town, and we cannot allow. Allow what, Mr. Carter? Clara interrupted, her voice rising slightly. A woman of color to live with dignity, to be treated with respect? Or is it simply that you can't bear the sight of someone you tried to shame living better than you? William's face flushed a deeper shade of red. That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. Edward's voice was calm but sharp, like a blade sheathed in courtesy. You came here to intimidate Miss Johnson, to remind her of her place in your narrow view of society. But this is my home, and I will not allow anyone, not even a man I have known for years, to bring such small-minded prejudice through my doors. For a moment, there was only silence. William's gaze flicked between Edward and Clara, his hand twisting the brim of his hat anxiously. Perhaps the church committee should be more concerned with Christian charity than with gossip, Clara added, her tone steady. But let me save you the trouble, Mr. Carter. I have no intention of leaving Greenwood Manor. In fact, I intend to stay in Greenwood Valley for a very long time. William's jaw tightened. You have no family here, no job, no connections. You are a stranger. Not for long, Clara replied. Mr. Hale has graciously offered me the position of librarian here at Greenwood Manor. It seems generations of his family have collected books without ever organizing them properly. I intend to change that. Edward smiled slightly. Indeed, and I have never seen the library so well kept. William's expression shifted from shock to barely contained fury. This is absurd. You cannot simply waltz into this town and make it your own. And yet here I am, Clara replied, folding her hands calmly in front of her. Tell me, Mr. Carter, why does my presence bother you so much? Is it because I refuse to disappear quietly? Because I refuse to let your rejection define me? William's hand clenched around his hat. You're nothing but a troublemaker. Mark my words, Miss Johnson. You will regret this. No, Mr. Carter, Clara replied, her voice low and steady. It is you who will regret underestimating me. Before William could respond, Edward stepped forward, his gaze cold. I believe you have overstayed your welcome, William. Mrs. Thompson will see you out. William's mouth opened, then closed, his fury and embarrassment warring on his face. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, the heavy door slamming behind him. Clara stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to feel victorious, but another part felt a growing sense of dread. She had not just defied William Carter, she had openly challenged the unspoken rules of Greenwood Valley. You handled that well, Edward said, his voice gentle, his gaze warm. Did I? Clara asked, letting out a slow breath. I fear I've just made a powerful enemy. William Carter is not as powerful as he thinks, Edward replied. But you are far stronger than you know. Clara smiled faintly, but her mind raced. William's anger would not simply vanish, and she suspected he was not the only one in Greenwood Valley who viewed her as a threat. But she would not be intimidated. Not now, not when she was so close to understanding the full truth of her great-grandfather's legacy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the gardens, Clara returned to the library. Her fingers traced the spines of the books, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the secret history of Greenwood Valley, on the stolen land of Samuel Harris, and on the growing resolve within her heart. If they thought she would be silent, they were wrong. Clara Johnson had a voice, and she would use it. But first, She needed to be certain. She needed more than just stories and whispers. She needed proof, undeniable and unbreakable. And she would find it. The small hall of Greenwood Valley's town centre was packed. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of anxious townsfolk, their murmurs a steady hum that filled the space. Farmers in dusty work clothes, merchants in pressed suits, the town's preacher with his solemn gaze, all had come, drawn by the promise of a spectacle. At the front of the room, a long table stood like a judge's bench, behind which the town's elders sat, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. At the center of the gathering stood William Carter, his face flushed with anger, his voice raised for all to hear. "It's an outrage. Greenwood Valley has always been a respectable town, and now it is being shamed by a woman who has no right to be here." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others exchanging uneasy glances. In the midst of the clamor, the heavy wooden doors swung open. Edward Hale entered, his tall figure calm and composed, and beside him walked Clara Johnson, her back straight, her gaze steady. The room fell into a tense silence. "I appreciate the invitation, gentlemen," Edward's voice carried across the room, polite yet firm. "But I must correct a misunderstanding. Miss Johnson is not here as my guest. She is here as the legal representative of a matter that deeply concerns all of you." William's face twisted with a mocking smile. "Legal representative? A woman of color with no education or authority? Hale, have you completely lost your senses?" Clara stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "Actually, Mr. Carter, I hold legal power of attorney as a direct descendant of Samuel Harris." Her words struck like a lightning bolt, and the room erupted in shocked whispers. "Samuel Harris?" one of the elders muttered, his brow furrowed. "That's an old name. An old name with a very real history," Clara continued, placing a large, weathered ledger on the table. "This is the journal of Samuel Harris, my great-grandfather. It documents how his land, the very land many of you live on, was taken from him by deception and fraud." William's face went pale. That's nonsense. Samuel Harris is nothing but a ghost story, a legend told by superstitious fools." "Then explain this," Clara said, her fingers carefully pulling a yellow document from her briefcase. "The original land grant from the governor, signed in 1866, naming Samuel Harris as the rightful owner of vast tracts of land in Greenwood Valley." The room fell deathly quiet. Even the elders leaned forward, their expressions grave. This cannot be real," one of the elders whispered, adjusting his glasses to examine the document. "I assure you it is very real," Clara replied. "And it is not alone. I have here multiple records from the Maxwell Library, land deeds, and letters detailing how the so-called Greenwood Property Committee conspired to seize the land of Samuel Harris under false pretenses. Those who sit here in comfort today are living on stolen ground." "You're lying!" William shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "These are forgeries, tricks." "I have had them verified by the State Historical Records Commission." Clara's voice remained calm. "And here," she pulled another document from her briefcase, "is a sworn affidavit from the Commission's director attesting to their authenticity." The whispers grew louder, a ripple of shock spreading through the room. Faces turned pale, and even the elders exchanged worried glances. Only Edward Hale remained calm, his steady gaze fixed on William. "This is an outrage!" William bellowed, his voice now frantic. "You came here to destroy this town, to tear down everything we've built." "No, Mr. Carter," Clara replied, her tone steady, her gaze unwavering. "I came here to restore what was stolen, to reclaim the legacy of my family." "But I am not here for revenge. I have a proposal." "A proposal?" one of the elders asked, his voice cautious. "Yes," Clara nodded. "I do not wish to destroy Greenwood Valley, but to rebuild it fairly, justly. I propose the creation of the Harris Foundation, a community fund that will provide scholarships, support local education, and ensure that the future generations of this town are not burdened by the sins of the past. A stunned silence followed. No one had expected this. Many had feared that Clara would demand the land back, force families out of their homes. But her words were a call for justice, not vengeance. "That's ridiculous!" William shouted, his face red with fury. "You think we should just hand over our money? For what? A ghost's claim?" "For the truth," Clara replied calmly. "For the chance to build a community where everyone is treated with dignity." The elder at the center of the table, an old man with a silver beard, leaned forward. "And what will you do if we refuse, Miss Johnson?" "I will have no choice but to take this matter to court," Clara answered. "And I assure you, with these documents, I will win. But I would rather see Greenwood Valley united than divided by hatred and greed." Murmurs filled the room once more. Some of the townsfolk nodded, whispering to one another. The weight of the truth pressed down on them all. "Samuel Harris was a man of honor," Clara continued, her voice strong. "He believed in justice, in dignity, even when those around him betrayed him. I will not allow his memory to be twisted by those who wish to deny what is right." At the back of the room, Reverend Miller stood, his aged voice calm but firm. "We have all heard enough. The truth is clear. We must decide whether we will cling to our pride or embrace the chance to do what is right." William's fists clenched, his voice a venomous whisper. "This town doesn't owe you anything, Clara Johnson." "No, William," Edward spoke, his voice cool and sharp. "But it owes the truth, and it owes Samuel Harris the justice he was denied." The elders whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of shame and contemplation. Finally, the silver-bearded elder stood. "We will vote on the creation of the Harris Foundation. Those in favor?" One by one, hands rose, slowly but surely. Even those who hesitated finally joined. Only William's hand remained at his side, his face a mask of rage and defeat. "The motion is passed," the elder announced, his voice heavy with emotion. "The Harris Foundation will be established, and Greenwood Valley will begin the process of righting this historical wrong." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she remained composed. This was not a victory of pride, but a victory of truth. As the townsfolk began to file out, some offering her hesitant smiles, others avoiding her gaze, she felt Edward's hand gently touch her shoulder. "You did it," he whispered, pride in his eyes. "No," Clara replied, her gaze steady. "Samuel did." "I was just his voice." The days that followed the town hall meeting were a whirlwind of cautious congratulations, whispered apologies, and silent stares. Clara Johnson walked through the streets of Greenwood Valley with a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Though some turned away, avoiding her gaze, others nodded respectfully, acknowledging the woman who had dared to speak the truth. The Harris Foundation became the talk of the town. Some whispered that it was nothing more than a scheme, a way for Clara to take what she didn't deserve. Others saw it for what it truly was, a chance for Greenwood Valley to heal, to finally acknowledge its past and build a better future. Edward Hale was her strongest supporter. From the moment the vote had been cast, he worked tirelessly to ensure that the foundation was properly established. He provided an initial endowment, a generous sum that surprised even Clara. "This is your vision, Clara," he told her one evening as they stood in his study, the soft glow of the fire casting shadows on the walls. "But it is also my home. I want to see it thrive, not fester in lies." Clara's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Edward. I couldn't have done this without you." But not everyone was willing to accept this new reality so easily. William Carter was a storm of bitterness and anger. His shop, once bustling, now saw fewer customers, his reputation tarnished by his outburst at the town hall. Rumors swirled about his financial troubles, and it wasn't long before he put his property up for sale. No one seemed interested in buying. One grey morning, Clara was reviewing the final documents for the Harris Foundation at Edward's study when Mrs. Thompson entered, her expression tense. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Carter is here again. Clara exchanged a glance with Edward, who gave a slight nod. Send him in. William Carter entered, his once proud posture now stooped, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. But the bitterness in his eyes had not faded. Well, you must be proud of yourself, he spat, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. You've ruined me, my shop, my name, all because you couldn't leave the past buried. Clara met his gaze calmly. I didn't ruin you, Mr. Carter. The truth did. You chose to deny it, to fight against it instead of accepting it. Truth? William's voice rose. What does the truth matter when it destroys everything you've built? It matters because it gives us a chance to build something better, Clara replied, her tone steady. The Harris Foundation is not about revenge. It is about justice. It is about ensuring that the sins of the past do not continue to poison the future. Justice, William sneered. You call this justice? You've taken everything from me. I offered you a chance to be part of this, Clara said, her voice soft but firm. I proposed a way for this town to heal, for us to move forward together. But you refused to listen. William's hand clenched at his side. And now what? You want me to beg for a handout from your precious foundation? No, Clara said calmly, but the foundation can help you. If you are willing to let go of your pride. Edward stepped forward, his expression serious. William, the foundation will provide support for businesses affected by the transition. You could apply for funding to start anew, but that requires accepting that change has come to Greenwood Valley. William's face twisted, his pride warring with his desperation. For a moment, he looked as though he might lash out, but then his shoulders slumped. This town, this was my father's dream. And now it's gone. No, Clara replied, a hint of compassion in her voice. It is not gone. It is changing. And you can be part of that change. William stared at her, a flicker of something regret, shame, perhaps understanding passing through his eyes. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the heavy door closing behind him. Clara let out a slow breath, her hands trembling slightly. Will he ever change? She whispered. Perhaps, Edward said gently, or perhaps he won't. But that is not your burden to carry. The days turned into weeks, and the Harris Foundation began to take shape. The funds were carefully managed, scholarships were awarded to promising young students, and local businesses received support to adapt to new markets. Clara worked tirelessly, overseeing applications, organizing community events, and ensuring that the foundation remained true to its purpose. But it was not without challenges. Some families still harbored resentment, clinging to their prejudices even as they accepted the foundation's support. Others saw Clara as a beacon of change, a woman who had turned her own pain into a source of healing for the town. One afternoon, Clara visited the new community library, which had been established in William Carter's former shop. Rows of books lined the shelves, and young children gathered around Mrs. Thompson, who now served as the librarian, reading stories with a warm smile. Miss Johnson, one of the children called, waving eagerly. Clara's heart swelled with joy as she waved back. Hello, everyone! I hope you're enjoying your books. Yes, ma'am, they chorused, their bright faces a reminder of why this all mattered. As she wandered the quiet rows of books, Clara's fingers brushed against the spines, her gaze lingering on the history section. Stories of old Greenwood Valley, once buried, were now proudly displayed, the truth no longer hidden. Outside, she found Edward waiting, leaning casually against the wrought iron fence, his smile warm. I thought I might find you here. I wanted to see how the library was doing, Clara said, joining him. It feels right. Like a place where stories can finally be told. And your story is just beginning, Edward replied, his voice gentle. The Harris Foundation has already made such a difference, Clara. None of this would have been possible without you. Not without you either, Clara smiled, her hand gently brushing his. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." They walked together through the bustling streets of Greenwood Valley, the town alive with new energy. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was cautious hope. The Harris Foundation had become a bridge, a promise that the future could be better than the past. And as they walked, Edward's hand found Clara's, his fingers lacing gently with hers. "What will you do now, Clara?" he asked. Clara looked up at him, her smile radiant. "Continue building. Not just with the foundation, but with you. This town isn't perfect, but it can change." "It is changing." Edward leaned down, his voice a soft whisper. "Because of you." The two continued their walk, side by side, as the warm sunlight bathed the streets of Greenwood Valley. And for the first time in a long while, Clara Johnson felt not just hopeful, but truly, deeply at home. The Greenwood Valley of old was slowly fading away, replaced by a town that was learning to embrace change. The Harris Foundation had become more than just a charitable organization. It was a symbol of reconciliation, of a community trying to heal the wounds of its past. Clara Johnson found herself at the heart of this transformation, not just as the Foundation's founder, but as a quiet force of dignity and determination. Every morning, Clara walked the streets of Greenwood Valley, her presence no longer met with whispered gossip or hostile glares. Instead, people greeted her with nods, polite smiles, and even warm waves. Some still kept their distance, their prejudices too deeply rooted to be easily overcome. But Clara didn't focus on them. She focused on those who wanted to learn, to grow, to be part of something better. The Harris Foundation's first major project was the Community Scholarship Program. Clara spent hours reviewing applications from young students, many of whom came from families that had never dreamed of affording higher education. She read their essays, their stories of hope and struggle, and saw in them the same resilience that had carried her through her own trials. One sunny afternoon, Clara sat with a young girl named Marianne, whose wide eyes sparkled with excitement as she talked about her dream of becoming a teacher. "Miss Johnson, do you really think I can go to college?" Marianne asked, her voice filled with both hope and doubt. "I don't just think you can, Marianne," Clara replied, her warm smile radiating confidence. "I know you can. And the Harris Foundation is here to help you get there." But education was only one part of the Foundation's mission. Clara and Edward Hale worked together to launch community workshops, classes on farming techniques, small business management, and even basic literacy for adults who had never had the opportunity to learn. Edward's estate became a hub of learning and growth, the grand hall once used for extravagant parties now a place of knowledge and empowerment. Mrs. Thompson, the ever-dedicated housekeeper, became an instructor for a weekly cooking class, teaching young women and men the art of preparing wholesome, affordable meals. "If you can feed a family, you can nurture a community," she often said, her hands deftly kneading dough while her students watched with rapt attention. Edward, ever the supportive partner, helped organize agricultural fairs where local farmers could showcase their produce, learn new techniques, and share their stories. He walked the fields with them, discussing soil quality, crop rotation, and fair wages for workers. His reputation as a wealthy landowner slowly transformed into that of a respected leader who genuinely cared about the well-being of the community. But it was Clara's quiet presence that inspired the most profound change. Her gentle words, her willingness to listen, her refusal to judge even those who had once wronged her. These were the qualities that won hearts. Even those who had once whispered against her found it difficult to deny the good she was doing. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves danced in the breeze, Clara received an unexpected visitor. Reverend Miller, the elderly preacher who had once questioned her presence in town, now stood at her doorstep, his weathered hat in his hands. "Miss Johnson," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I came to apologize. I was wrong. I judged you before I ever knew you. before I understood the truth of your heart." Clara smiled gently, stepping aside to invite him in. "Reverend, I have always believed that true faith is about growth. You have nothing to apologize for if you are willing to change." Tears filled the old man's eyes, and he nodded. "I see now that the Lord brought you here for a reason, to heal this town in ways we never thought possible." But even as Greenwood Valley embraced its transformation, not everyone shared in the optimism. William Carter, once a prominent merchant, now lived in a modest cottage at the edge of town. His fortunes faded along with his pride. He watched from afar as Clara's influence grew, his bitterness a constant shadow. One evening, as Clara walked home from a community meeting, she noticed William standing by the old church, his figure slumped, his gaze fixed on the cobblestones. For a moment, she considered walking by without a word, but something inside her refused to let bitterness take root. "Mr. Carter," she called gently. William looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Miss Johnson, I hope you're well," Clara continued, her voice kind but steady. William's shoulders sagged. "Well, do you think I'm well, Clara?" "Watching everything I built crumble while you stand there like some saint." Clara's expression remained calm. "I am not a saint, Mr. Carter. I am simply a woman who refused to be broken by hate." "Hate!" he scoffed. But the anger in his voice was weak, brittle. "What do you want from me?" "I want nothing from you," Clara replied. "But if you ever wish to rebuild, to be part of this town's future instead of a ghost of its past, the Harris Foundation is here for you too." William's jaw tightened, his pride warring with something deeper: shame, regret, perhaps even loneliness. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the cobblestones. Clara watched him go, a quiet sadness in her heart. Not everyone could change. But she would not let his bitterness cloud the progress they had made. The Harris Foundation continued to grow, its impact spreading beyond Greenwood Valley. Journalists arrived to write about the remarkable transformation of the town, about the woman who had turned a legacy of injustice into a force for good. Clara received invitations to speak at universities, sharing the story of her great-grandfather Samuel Harris and the power of truth. During one such speech at a nearby college, Clara stood before a packed hall, her voice strong and clear. "Justice is not about punishment. It is about restoration. It is about taking what was broken and making it whole again. That is what we did in Greenwood Valley. And that is what I hope each of you will carry forward in your own lives." After her speech, Edward met her outside, his proud smile a constant source of strength. "Every time I hear you speak, Clara, I remember why I fell in love with you." Clara's cheeks warmed, and she took his hand. "And I remember why I never gave up, because I was never alone." The two walked together under the golden autumn trees, the crisp air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. Greenwood Valley was no longer a place of whispered gossip and quiet prejudice. It was a community in bloom, a place where stories were no longer buried, but celebrated. And at the heart of it all was Clara Johnson, a woman who had transformed pain into purpose, hate into hope, and a fractured town into a place of promise. 6 months after the town of Greenwood Valley voted to establish the Harris Foundation, the transformation was undeniable. What had once been a community divided by prejudice and whispered rumors was now a place where stories of hope and resilience flourished. Clara Johnson stood at the heart of this change, her quiet strength guiding the town towards a brighter future. The grand opening of the new Greenwood Community Library was a testament to this transformation. The building, which once housed William Carter's struggling store, had been renovated into a place of light and learning. Shelves lined with books, comfortable reading corners, and a large mural depicting the history of the town, including the story of Samuel Harris, adorned the walls. The plaque at the entrance read, in honor of Samuel Harris, whose legacy teaches us that truth will always prevail. Clara stood by the entrance, greeting townsfolk as they arrived for the opening ceremony. Mrs. Thompson, ever the dedicated caretaker, now served as the library's head librarian. Her warm smile and patient manner made the children adore her, and she ran storytelling sessions every Saturday. Edward Hale was by Clara's side, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His unwavering support had been a constant source of strength, and his commitment to the foundation had earned him even greater respect among the townspeople. Once seen only as a wealthy landowner, he was now known as a champion of education and community growth. As the ceremony began, the town's mayor stepped forward, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate more than just the opening of a library. We celebrate a journey from darkness to light, from division to unity, and none of this would have been possible without one remarkable woman, Miss Clara Johnson." The crowd erupted in applause, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. Stepping up to the podium, she looked out over the faces of Greenwood Valley. Some were old friends, others had once been strangers, and a few were people who had once viewed her with suspicion or resentment. But today, there was only gratitude in their eyes. "Thank you all," Clara began, her voice steady. "Thank you for believing in this dream, for choosing to be part of something greater than yourselves. The Harris Foundation is not just a name. It is a promise that this community will never again allow injustice to go unchallenged." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the crowd. "My great-grandfather, Samuel Harris, lost everything because of greed and prejudice. But today, his legacy lives on, not as a story of loss, but as a story of hope. And I promise you, as long as I stand here, I will continue to fight for fairness, for education, and for the dignity of every person in Greenwood Valley." The applause was thunderous, and Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek. But it was a tear of joy, of pride, of victory. After the ceremony, Clara and Edward walked together through the bustling streets of Greenwood Valley. The town was alive with energy farmers discussing new crops, children laughing as they played by the fountain, shopkeepers greeting customers with warm smiles. "You've done something remarkable here, Clara," Edward whispered, his fingers gently intertwining with hers. "You've changed this town." Clara leaned into his embrace, a soft smile playing on her lips. "We did this, Edward." "I couldn't have done it without you." They strolled past the schoolhouse, where a bright banner hung proudly reading, "Supported by the Harris Foundation." Inside, young students listened intently as their teacher read aloud, the light of curiosity shining in their eyes. But not all was perfect. There were still those who resisted change, who clung to the old ways of thinking. William Carter was one of them. His once busy shop now served as the community library, a reminder of how quickly power could shift. He lived quietly on the outskirts of town, bitter but defeated. One rainy evening, as Clara and Edward returned to Greenwood Manor, they found William waiting at the gate, his coat soaked, his expression one of weary resignation. "Mr. Carter?" Clara called, stepping forward. "Is everything all right?" William hesitated, his gaze dropping to the muddy ground. I just wanted to say I was wrong. About everything. About you, about the foundation. I thought you came here to destroy this town, but you saved it." Clara's heart softened. "People can change, Mr. Carter, and if you ever want to be part of this community again, the door is always open." William's eyes glistened with something Clara hadn't seen before: humility. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Clara." As he walked away, Edward placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. Not everyone can let go of their pride. But even those who fall can learn to stand again. The seasons changed, and so did Greenwood Valley. The Harris Foundation continued to grow, supporting local businesses, funding scholarships, and organizing community events. Clara traveled to nearby towns, sharing the story of Greenwood Valley's transformation, inspiring other communities to confront their own buried histories. But for all her travels, her heart remained in Greenwood Valley, in the fields that stretched beyond Edward's estate, in the laughter of children at the library, in the quiet strength of Mrs. Thompson as she welcomed new students to her reading sessions. One golden autumn afternoon, Clara and Edward stood together on the porch of Greenwood Manor, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves, scattering them across the lawn. "Do you ever wonder what your great-grandfather would think, seeing all of this?" Edward asked softly. Clara smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I think he would be proud, not just of what we've built, but of what we've become. A community that chooses truth over lies, kindness over hatred." Edward's fingers gently intertwined with hers. "And I am proud of you, Clara Johnson. You are the bravest person I have ever known." Clara turned to him, her smile warm and full of love. "And you are the best partner I could have ever hoped for." They stood together in the quiet, peaceful glow of the sunset, knowing that their journey was far from over. But whatever the future held, they would face it together. For Greenwood Valley was not just a place, it was a promise that even the darkest of histories could be rewritten with courage, that even the deepest wounds could be healed with hope. And at the heart of it all was Clara Johnson, a woman who had taken the pain of the past and turned it into a beacon of light for generations to come. Life is a journey filled with challenges, and sometimes those challenges come in the form of prejudice, betrayal, or injustice. But the story of Clara Johnson in Greenwood Valley teaches us a powerful truth, that true strength is not found in revenge, but in the courage to heal, to forgive, and to rebuild. Clara had every reason to seek revenge on those who wronged her. She could have demanded everything that was stolen from her great-grandfather, Samuel Harris. But instead she chose a different path, a path of justice, not vengeance. Through the Harris Foundation, she transformed her family's painful history into an opportunity for education, growth, and healing for an entire community. Her story is a reminder that we all have the power to turn pain into purpose. Even in our later years, we can choose to be a light in dark places, to be a voice of truth and compassion. We can mend old wounds, build bridges where there were once walls, and leave a legacy of kindness and courage for those who come after us. Because true victory is not about defeating others, it is about lifting them up.